Yeah, I got into film distribution first through working in film exhibition, from the bottom up, ushering in cinemas. Started at the David Lean Cinema in Croydon before moving to the Cambridge Arts Cinema, where I was front of house manager for 3 years. I then came to the Institute of Contemporary Arts, which has both 2 cinemas and a film distribution company as a separate kind of trading arm. So I learned about film distribution there before setting up Soda Pictures with a friend of mine in 2002, and so this is obviously our 10th year that we're celebrating. Well, distribution remains a place of innovation. The relationship with the audience is a constantly evolving, well, not the relationship with the audience, the way we communicate to the audience is constantly evolving. And like any kind of media business or leisure business, we have to evolve and engage with the different ways that that businesses communicate with audiences and motivate audiences to go and see feature films, and whether that's the impact of television box sets, gaming, and the digital world in general. We have to find ways to innovate with those developments. Well, certainly a role for the kind of curator in culture generally, and obviously there's lots of people in the media who see themselves as curators in that sense, and whether you're a critic or just in the general media on television as well, there is going to be some influence you have in motivating the wider general public to engage in a cultural activity. So certainly, there's a role there. Obviously, as an independent distributor, we have a role in terms of selecting films in the first place. The films don't come to us; we go out and decide on what films we want to work with, based on the idea of there being an audience for them. So there's a level of kind of curatorial action involved in that process, and that evolves over time. And we obviously analyse numbers on films that are being released to gauge what films audiences respond to, and evolve with that if necessary. Well, I've been engaged to hold some discussions with selected producers, which has been really interesting. I mean, it's a range of producers on the scheme with projects at different stages. And we were used to working with producers in the UK on a regular basis on films that we release, so it's been quite engaging meeting different producers with projects that may not have come across our desk because they're either a lot bigger in scope or at an earlier stage. So I've been mentoring a couple of producers who have been really interesting, and we've had some great conversations. We've held a number of meetings to talk about, mostly around kind of their business planning in some ways, not just focusing on film packaging and how they're kind of taking those film projects to market. It's also had some interesting conversations around planning the business they're in, particularly in production, where it's very difficult to create a sustainable production entity. So how is it best to work as an independent producer? What kind of structure makes sense? Do you just work in feature film, or are you working in gaming or television, and how to engage with new tax credits? And so that's been something that we've been following up since the first session through into this one. Well, I mean, a producer should be thinking about distribution and audiences from the off, really. I think what's been interesting over the last few years is that, as kind of mainstream distribution has polarised, so as the opportunities for kind of self-distribution, which, a lot of filmmakers may think, well, actually I want to be a filmmaker, not a distributor. And obviously distribution is in some way a level of services that can augment the kind of activity that is kind of obvious in some ways. I think most producers know that you need to communicate to audiences through marketing techniques, and some of those are readily available now to the producer, social media being an obvious example. And so there are opportunities for producers to self-distribute, or have discussions with the distribution company to deliver a bigger release for their film. And I think most producers will be thinking about that question very early on when they're financing a film. They'll need to be thinking about, how am I going to get a return for my investors? What is my route to market? And so they'll be engaging with distributors at a pre-production stage, on a planning stage, and hopefully they'll be thinking about what the kind of film they're making is, and what distributors in the marketplace have released films like that, that may have some expertise to augment the return on that kind of project. So a bit of kind of like basic research on who's out there, and obviously trying to arrange that kind of first meeting with their acquisitions people and introduce that project. Well, primarily in the early stages, I'm interested in obviously, the key elements, obviously, a basic treatment, but we're interested in casting and the kind of the talent involved. Essentially, do we see a range of talent that we think audiences will be interested in, and that could be either director focused or cast driven, or genre driven, depending on the type of project. So it's elements that we can recognise that audiences will be interested in. We have to be interested in those same elements. And S1 is particularly a kind of a first-time filmmaker with a very strong visual approach that engages us. So if you're coming along to a pitch session, you may come with just a show reel or short film that you can send us in advance so that we watch and engage with visually what you're trying to do. I think it can be as basic as that. I think that suffices. Well, hopefully, on the whole, the earlier you engage distribution, obviously, if you have a project that is, for an argument's sake, generic British drama, it can be difficult to attach a distributor at an earlier stage, and so you may have to be going through production without knowing will there be a distributor at the end, and you may be just looking to have a screening for distribution after production. So during production, obviously concentrate on the production and concentrate on making the best film that you can make, because ultimately if you're waiting to show distributors afterwards, you've got to make the best film. Going along and saying, well, we've got a Facebook following of X hundred, it's really not going to make a difference if the film's not very good. So that's the reality. There's no point saying, cut yourselves a great trailer. Again, you're not a trailer cutter, you're a filmmaker. There's a skill and an art involved in trailer cutting. It's a different discipline in some ways. So, it's too easy to get sidetracked to kind of things like that. It's almost, if you've got a distributor involved, get them involved during pre-production. They're, doing things like unit PR, increasingly is done by distributors as a service rather than, hiring an agency to do that. Talking about stills photographer, it's absolutely key, getting the right stills, action stills, not just endless portraits of people in the film, things that can be used for that poster that you see. You need images to support that. So it's kind of basics that one can use through production if you've got a distributor involved, and if you haven't, concentrate on making a good film. Well, new platforms are obviously, new ways to reach new audiences in theory, and obviously we're engaged on all platforms to try and do that. I think ultimately, it's still, there's an audience and there's a film, and, distributor is engaged in a kind of a warfare in terms of bringing those two elements together by whatever means necessary, and, we will constantly strive to innovate in that process. And if things like, for example, the idea that video on demand platforms can reach every household in the UK, does that mean we'll suddenly have 80 million people wanting to watch the next British independent film? No, it doesn't. So potential and realising that potential are obviously two different things.